welcome. Welcome all the participants to this live virtual session on the important topic regulation and approach to green and uh, sustainable crop production, which will be addressed by a learned speaker from IIT Delhi, Professor Kavya Dasora, and our convener of the group, CA Pankaj Sai, is with us. So I'll ask Sir to kindly introduce the learned faculty and say a few words about our initiatives.
A very good evening to one and all. It is indeed a great pleasure to interact with you all. We, from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, have constituted a group on development of rural economy this year. And under this group, we are taking various initiatives so that on economical front and how CA Institute and our branches, our chartered accountants can contribute in the development of rural economy. In this series, today we have Dr. Kavya Dashora, who will be speaking on the topic of regulation and approach to green and sustainable crop development, crop production. Dr. Dashora is based at Center for Rural Development and Technology under IIT New Delhi, and she is working at the intersection of nanotechnology and sustainable agriculture. Her research covers nanosynthesis, nanotoxicity, green crop production, and thus she is the most apt speaker for today's topic. We welcome Madam in today's webinar, and I also welcome all the participants. And I would request you all also to give suggestions how ICI can contribute in this agenda of development of rural economy. So with these words, I would like to welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir. Now, ma'am, you can start your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Pankaj Shah, and thank you, sir, for having me here. I would try my best to live up to the expectation of the Premium Institute, and also, as Shah sir rightly said, that let us make this session very interactive, because both the institutions are standing at a verge where we need to blend together to have a better agricultural system. So I am sharing my presentation. Is it visible?
Yes.
So, good evening, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here to speak about regulation and approaches to sustainable crop production. The focus I have kept in and around economics, trade, and policy implications. So, just a brief profile. I started my career as a scientist at UNCGIR and Commonwealth System, and I moved up to the ladder of Deputy Director Commonwealth Agriculture, and then I moved to IIT Delhi. I had 12 years of international R&D exposure, and my postings had been in all 35 countries. So when I actually say about sustainability, this is the whole southern hemisphere I'm talking about. The different ways by which the agriculture has been flawed, different ways by which the agriculture has shown the way. It is just an amalgamation of all. I am presently working as Associate Professor at CRDT and also Associate Faculty at TRD School of Artificial Intelligence at IIT Delhi. So, if we say what were the four major milestones in human history, so we start from the cognitive revolution, where, with the presence of light, with the presence of fire, man started to have roasted food, cooked food, and after that, he realized that his body is gaining more strength. He started developing cognitive skills, and from there, he progressed towards the man of today. So, that revolution was the first revolution. The second revolution was agricultural revolution. So there is a small story actually which says that one day a man was coming back from forest, and he used to live in cave those days, and it was pitch dark. But suddenly there was a lightning, and one of the lightning fell on one of the trees. So because of that, fire occurred, and that fire he took inside his cave and saw a lot of meat lying out there. He ate that raw meat, and he started beginning strong. He started beginning to feel better and warm. So after that, uh, he started into the cultured society type of a thing, because now it was easier for him to, he was stronger than before, it was easier for him to eat food, it was easier for him to store food for a longer time, because cooked food was higher shelf life is in contrast to the raw food. And from there he started division of labor. That means men used to go and hunt and women used to stay back with children and elderly people. So a clustered based, group based formation of society started happening. So it is said that when women were just chit chatting around, they started eating a few fruits which were lying here and there, and after eating they threw the seeds there. And one of the old women knew that one day they will come up as trees. So this was the foundation of agriculture, wherein they knew that what seeds we want to grow can be grown as a crop. So agriculture revolution happened, and after that we had scientific revolution, followed by the major wars, followed by the colonization, and after that we had industrial revolution. Industrial revolution is the newest revolution, but then it has shrunk the world into one email across. It has connected the world through internet, and now of course quantum is also taking place. But agriculture revolution still remains as the landmark feature. So for today, the problem statement is we are producing more than what we require. When initially there was a race to be number one in food production, number one in food consumption, number one in industrial crops, and now we have achieved that status. We are yet not happy. We are continuously number one for so many years. And in certain crops, we are in certain crops, other part of the countries, other part of the world are. So someone somewhere is number one in production of some crop, but then this much of the crop we don't even need. If you see, we have a public distribution system where food goes waste. We have a lot of food which just do not address properly, and it is just thrown away or wasted. We go to restaurant, we want to eat a bread, and then we order a loaf, and then we order butter and jam and salad and soup and everything, and then we realize, no, this is not all what we wanted to eat, so everything goes waste. So right now our ratio of growing and our ratio of wasting is actually coming very close to each other. And not just growing more and not just wasting more, we are doing something more than required. We are depleting natural resources more than required. We are not working it out in a sustainable way. We are just running after the numbers. We don't even care what is the condition of our health, the soil health, the environmental health. We are continuously using chemicals which do not even belong to soil. We are facing the climate change impact much sooner than they were predicted. And also, we now, since everybody has surplus and food is likely to become the new currency, the new economy, so the trade and compliances issue are so high that people find it luxury to throw away the food, rather than they would just accommodate and say, okay, yes, our people need food. They would just throw it away. It is not as per my wish, or it is not as per my paper. We have really gone so overboard because we are producing more, we are utilizing the resources more or exploiting the resources more, and that is not a sustainable way of production. So how do we define sustainable way of production? When we produce more with limited resources, that means we produce what we require, and also we know that the coming generations would be needing it, so we save it for them. It is something like our ancestors did. They had the whole earth to themselves when the population was not much, but they did not raise the forest. They only cleared the amount the land piece they wanted to grow, and after that they moved on. When they realized that now soil needs rest, they moved on, and soil naturally grew a forest over it, and they used soil somewhere else. So this type of sense also we have lost. Although they were primitive, they were cave dwellers, and we are modern, and we are everything which is just short of becoming a god. But still we are wasting the resources, we are wasting the soil environment, and at the end we are also wasting the produce. We are when we enhance soil health, water efficiency and biodiversity, we are working in a sustainable way. Right now, if you see in our country from north to south and from east to west, we are actually growing hybrid seeds. The original land races which we grew as a diversity in our country is almost vanished. How many of us we really know how many species of rice are there? We do not know. We have just lost the track of it. Right now, most of us are just knowing or working or dealing with the hybrid varieties, or at max if you ask the younger generation or consumers, they would just give you the brand name rather than the crop variety name. They would say it is Sri Lal Mahal, they would say it is Tilda, but they would not know what variety it is growing. We are ready to pay money for brands, but not for the crop, the type of crop, the land race of the crop. The problem of it is, why did we really switch over to hybrid seeds? It was because we wanted to save our crops from pest diseases. We wanted to have more resilient crops, but over a period of time, it took over the greed. We wanted to have more and more yield. We wanted to have more and more harvest. We wanted to sell more. And that is why we just kept away the varieties which were locally grown. They were resilient against the local pests, they were resilient against the local pathogens, and they were having the properties of the soil and palatable to the people. So now you find most of the time people cannot even eat rice or wheat, or the diseases from the common cereals are also occurring because we have just killed our own variety. Now growing hybrid seeds for a very long time, the problem would be that if one pest attacks, just imagine what will happen to our country. From north to south and from west to east, they will have the same type of food available. The pest will have the same type of food available, and in fair chance, our country would be reduced to a begging bowl because everything would be eaten away. And it is not impossible, it is possible, because we are just growing same type of crops. And in lieu of that, what are we really thinking? We are thinking that we just need to sell. Most of the time I have spoken to agricultural economists, and they, the first word they speak is agricultural trade, export. But we have so many people who need food in our own country. Our sustainability concept is about a sustainable economy which should rise in numbers, but at the same time, we should be focusing on what we are doing to our soil, what we are doing to our crops, what we are doing to our trade to sustain it for coming generations. Now, how is this sustainability governed? When we are exploring or exporting the crops, we just don't go out in the market and say, all right, we are exporting this crop to Indonesia or England or America. We are not doing that. We have a mutual trade agreement wherein we would say, okay, this is the quantity we would like to buy. You have to make sure that you don't have these pests. You have to make sure you are not using these chemicals. So it is bound by a law or a treaty, and these are called as international treaties, and these are governed by World Trade Organizations. Apart from that, there are national laws or even national quarantines which allow the regulation of the crop, the regulation of the production, and also restriction of certain crops. Like I give you an example. In India, in India itself, there is a state of West Bengal where there are potatoes grown. No one is allowed to take those potatoes out of West Bengal because of a specific nematode called golden nematode, and that is found in that region of our country. And if those potatoes come out of that state, then every state in India will get affected, and we are going to lose our crop. So that is why they have applied domestic quarantine to it, and it is done on several crops. The potato is just one example I'm giving. Then market based instruments. These are regulatory oversystems, regulatory ecosystems, and voluntary standards. Like you have companies, you have startups, you have certification agencies like Rainforest Alliance, like Fair Trade, who actually go out and tell people how to grow the crop in the best way. Like suppose you want organic only, but can you call any crop organic? What is the time duration for it? Suppose I want to declare my farm as organic today, I have to have a certification from Indian Association of Organic Agriculture. I should also be complying to their guidelines of at least 3 years of no pesticide use. There should be a buffer zone between me and my neighbor. I will use the seeds which are not primed with pesticides. So these are certain guidelines. So they help us to grow organic, or they help us to commit to what we are promising. To speak about our approach to sustainable production, we have agroecology, wherein traditionally we never used to grow one crop continuously, because the same type of nutrients are being taken up, the same type of soil microbes are utilized, eventually declining into soil health. So what we used to do was, if we just refer to our ancestors, they would grow cereal, and then they would grow vegetable, and then they would leave the land fallow. And most of our ancestors just had one harvest a year, and that was fine. But now, present farmer wants at least three harvests a year, and apart from that, it would still like to extract some money from a short-term crop like vegetable, or possibly a green manure or something, or flowers or something. But at the end, it is not about yield. It is about, by the rate we are extracting the soil nutrients, by the rate we are exploiting the soil, will we be able to hand over the same soil, nutritionally depleted soil, to our children? Effective microbes are killed already. Will we be able to give that barren soil to our children? And if we even give them, will they be able to produce more? They will never be able to do so. So the best way to do for a sustainable crop production is, you should do intercropping. That means two crops, in between two crops you have different crop. So there is a kind of an exchange and a bridging of nutrients, a bridging of microbes, and also it will give you double the income. That is also there. Then crop rotation, I just mentioned, not one crop should be grown thrice a year. It should be once vegetable, once cereal, maybe once green manure. So that makes your soil become live. New microbes work on it, and new nutrients work on it, and reduced tillage. More we till our soil, more we are upturning it, more good nutrients come up, and the underground water table reduces, because we are continuously keeping the soil up. So aeration also increases, making the things dry. So if we do not till, it is like we are just keeping the soil as it is. We are not disturbing the soil much. So the microbe population is growing, earthworm population is growing, and making our soil healthier. And also it reduces the dependency on inputs. Right now we know that our country heavily imports cooking oil, but then we are the country who produces maximum oil seed. Why do we really need to import cooking oil? Because whatever oil seed we are producing, we are extracting oil from that, and that oil is all consumed. So our dependence is increasing on imports, and that is not good, because India, being an agricultural land, is taking food from outside, is taking grains from outside, and one day it will so happen that our farmers will not get enough price, and farming will be reduced. One of the very good technology with Africa is a push pull technology, wherein they do not use, in Africa, maize is a very staple crop, and then they do not use too much of pesticide to it. So they use this technology called push pull, and how it is benefited, I'll let you know. They would just have a piece of land, and inside, at the center of the maize farm, they would apply some crops which are repellent, like some grasses which have specific aroma, let us say lemongrass. And then they will have a maize crop, and then on the outside of the field they will have tagetes or marigold, we call it. And why do they do that? Because African soils are heavily infested with nematodes. Now, marigold has a natural property to attract nematodes, and grasses have a natural property to repel nematodes. In India, we are using nematicides, some chemicals which not only pollute the soil but also get leached into the drinking water. But what they are doing is, they are collecting a harvest of marigold, they are collecting the harvest of grass which they feed to their cattle, and also their maize is nematode free. So this type of an approach is a sustainable approach, where you believe that everybody has a right to live on this planet, and you're not killing them outright. we have started using chemicals at an alarming rate. Then precision agriculture and digital tools like AI, IoT, drone mapping, soil sensors, targeted irrigation and fertilization, and cost effective and traceable inputs are equally important when we say it has to be sustainable. Because in my experience, I have seen several agricultural countries and I have seen India also. Customary farmer would irrigate his soil. Customary he would add pesticide to it. Customary application of urea is there. It is not required. At least check the soil once. Does it really require? It is something like at 9 a.m. we need a breakfast, at 1 a.m. we have a lunch break, and at 8 p.m. we need dinner, whether we are hungry or not. But if the clock strikes 1, we all go for lunch break. So, similarly, people have made it to agriculture soil as well. That whether the soil needs it or not, the urea would be provided or the food would be provided. This is harming the soil. Instead of nutrition, it is making the soil toxic. Usage of these devices like AI, like IoT sensors, they are helping us to get the correct data and also demand from the soil so that only that amount of chemical or the input can be added. Another interesting and most effective way to make the soil sustainable is integrated pest and nutrient management. It is also known as IPM and INM. It combines biological and chemical methods. So, in IPM, essentially what we do is we start with biologicals, and some people even start with ethical. They have named it ethical. I'll just give you one example of ethical. Like in tea bushes, there are certain pests which settle down as the sun sets. So a person would hold a small earthen pot, छोटे मटके के जैसा he would hold, and he would have camphor, he would have loban, he would have agar, various aromatic resins, and he would just cross across the tea bushes. He would just move across the tea bushes with that smoking aromatic thing, and because of that smoke the pest doesn't settle, and when pest doesn't settle it does not eat the crop. So the room for the pest is also alive, but our crop is also saved because we are removing the pest, we are not killing the pest, so we are just taking him away. So from there we go to biologicals, that means neem spray or trichoderma, and from there we go to green labeled chemical, and then yellow, and then at last mostly not red labeled chemicals, and after that if need be we uproot the crop. So this is what integrated pest management does. But in general people would just directly use a red label chemical, and that is a very dangerous way to do because you are not even giving enough chance, you are already increasing the threshold. It means you're taking antibiotic worth 1500 2000 mg right away. You can start with gargles, right? That is just you are building your immunity also, but directly popping a very strong antibiotic reduces your immunity in due course, and that is what we are doing to our soils. IPM also encourages a farmer to develop a decision based spraying. If he has to take a decision, all right, my crop doesn't look so bad, I think I can go away without spraying, so it is fine. And then most of the time they use biofertilizer or biopesticides. Having good crop, it is not only important from soil point of view, or it is not only important from consumer point of view, it is very important from trade point of view. And in my life I have seen some examples which are alarming, particularly when it comes to India. One of them happened very recently with our mangoes, and some of them, like our rice, was rejected, so on and so forth. We'll talk about it in coming slides. But why economics, global trade compliances, and maximum residue limits? Now, when agricultural trade was being made, it was the people who made this. I would just draw your attention to one fact that if you look at Earth, if you look at the globe, it is clearly divided into northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. What is the speciality of the two hemispheres? Northern hemisphere is mostly a place, or mostly have the countries who are colonizers, who do not grow who have lesser population, who are so-called elites and whites. Whereas the southern hemisphere, if you see, we are agricultural landmass, we are overpopulated, we had been colonized, we are struck with poverty, we are always greedy, like trying to produce more, sell more, trying to be rich. So we do not have that threshold in our mind. All right, this is enough. This is my land. I think I should stop. But no, we will keep on adding things. So this is the stark difference between the two. So when the northern hemisphere people make rules, they know that if they open the gate, they would be opening the floodgates for every type of crop which is coming inside their country. And every type of crop means to grow that kind of crop, people will apply a lot of chemicals. And to grow that, to have that type of chemical to their citizens, to their people, that they don't do, that they would never do, because they have very strict norms and very strict health policies. So what the global norms have done is they have added maximum residue limit of every pesticide possible. That means you cannot spray more than this. And if the residue is testing, people are smart. They would spray lots and lots of pesticide and then wash and then give them as an exported crop. But those people say the maximum residue limit should be this. And if we find more than that, we are rejecting your crop. We don't want that consignment. Your loss is your loss, not our loss. So that MRL is a very unique threshold which people should comply to. Then rejection of Indian exports. We are our exports of honey, our exports of rice, of for mango, for lychee, you name it, and our crops have been rejected because of over exposure of or over spraying of chemicals and crossing the MRL limits. And this is the cost of non compliance. Um, Chartered accountants understand the value of trade laws, understand the value of bigger audits, but nobody audits the farmer's field. That all right, so much of loss. Now he doesn't even have anywhere to go. He would have to either throw away his crop or sell it at a very nominal price. Overall, it's a loss for him. So compliance is most important. Compliance of the rules which have been laid down. So stability standards and certifications. I told you the various. There are some voluntary organizations like Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, Rainforest Alliance, then Good Global Gap. We call it a global good agricultural practices. We call it. So these are the ones who educate people who are certification agencies, and they act as an intermediate between countries and continents, and they lay down the norms to be complied. Then price premiums versus certification cost. Now, this is a dilemma every farmer faces. They would face that, oh my God, why would we really get a certification? We are fine, we know what are we doing. But the importing countries want, somebody has to tell that you did not spray, somebody has to tell that you are producing organic. So when you go and buy organic stuff in the market, there is a tiny sticker written over it, right? It says organically produced. So the cost, the balance cost of the normal bindi and the organic bindi, normal mango and the organic mango, can be seen in that tiny sticker. Because if any trace is detected, that company who's putting the sticker becomes accountable, and that is a loss of a reputation. So farmers are in a dilemma whether to have a premium price, a higher end price, or a certification cost. And most of them choose certification cost. They would rather pay for certifications and draw higher prices for their produce. And then economic reporting and due diligence for exporters. So when you are doing exporters, and also when you are doing, when an importing country is asking for, let us say, mangoes, so it asks the agencies, you please let us know where are you going to source your mangoes from. I'll tell you one personal example I witnessed. I used to be in UK for a while, and one day I went to the superstore, and the superstore name of the superstore was Waitrose. So I was buying my weekend grocery, and I saw a lady which she came, and then she just kept a whole bag or a box of pear, and then she said that take away this pear, it has caused damage to me. This caught my attention. How can a pear cause a damage to you? I went to the counter and heard the conversation. The lady said, I took a pear and ate, and she had a tooth fracture. Like, a tooth was slightly displaced. So she immediately came back. Had it been India, we would have said, oh, please go and refer to a dentist. We have sold and we are not concerned. Right? But that gentleman, he took the box of pear, he contacted the agency. This all was happening right in front of me. He contacted the agency who had exported the pear fruit, and then he called the certification agency, and then he said that this agency, and then his customs office, and then he said that this fruit brand said that they are going to make the peel so thin that it can be taken a bite from the teeth, but a lady had a damage doing that of her tooth. So custom agency immediately blacklisted that producer. It just went down tracing them, and immediately they blacklisted the producer of the pear. It was a farm in Tanzania. It was blacklisted. So due diligence of the exporters, because you know that no, they have a clean record, and they would just not do any goof ups, and they would abide to the standards. Another important aspect is carbon markets and agriculture. So, role of agriculture in voluntary carbon credits now, because everybody wants to produce, but it is good if you produce, but not by adding more carbon to the environment. So, they are being taught, they are being encouraged, and also they are practicing ways and means so that the addition of the carbon is minimum, and this is called as carbon credits, voluntary carbon credits. So soil carbon sequestration is also being done. It is a sellable asset, and CA's role in auditing and verifying carbon offsets can be developed, derived, and can be placed at the premium agency like premium export agency like EPIDA or Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. So we have some case studies like India EU or organic export rejection. It just happened in 2023. And why did it happen? It happened because like it is not Khan market, no? When the Khan market is a premium market in Delhi, where you would find people telling you that this is organic. Why? The only criteria to say organic is it is deformed. So they would take every deformed vegetable and say it is organic, and in the middle of it, they would just fill it with the pesticide sprayed ones. So their argument is when other ladyfingers or when other tomatoes are being sold, the normal tomatoes are being sold for 60 rupees, organic ones are sold for 100 rupees, and even if they are able to sell it after bargaining at 80 rupees, they are still making a profit. They are not making a loss because their crop is not even organic. So this same method we tried to do it with EU. Now importing countries are very, very particular. When India is importing, we are very particular. Right now, whenever you switch on the TV, what debate do you see? India does not want to import US milk. We do not want to import US cattle feed. We are not interested. Why? Because we are importing, so it should be as per our terms. So, EU wanted certain compliances which we did not, and we called those product as organic. So, EU rejected the whole consignment because they found certain traces of the banned pesticides in this, and we kept on saying no, we did not use, and well, nobody listened because at that stage it is always black and white. It is never gray. All right, चलो 10 रुपए कम में कर देना या 1 लाख रुपए कम में कर देना. There is no scope of bargaining. It is always straightforward. So they rejected. There was a huge monetary loss, and that also raised a concern that we need transparent traceability systems. That means even at the exit gate in India, we should be able to trace from where the food is coming. Now there is a startup in India, in Noida region only. The name of the startup is Farmery. It is a milk startup basically, and they also give you fruits and vegetables. So one day I thought, okay, all right, if my milk vendor is from Farmery, I might buy vegetables also from the same vendor. But the cost of bananas, the cost of apples, the cost of every other fruit and vegetable was crazy expensive. I asked them, इतना क्यों, किस लिए महंगा है? Like they were giving 230 rupees for bananas, and I said, this is not even the price. Why should I pay so much? So the person told me, if you click on the banana symbol, you would find the name of the farmer, the coordinates of the farm from where it is being produced, and also the amount of pesticide or the chemicals he has been using. I said, well, this information is definitely important to me, but four bananas for 230 rupees is little out of my reach right now, because by the time they're going to come to me, they would anyways be spoiled. But then we do need that system. That is costly right now because it is only a couple of startups who is doing it. But we need to make it a normal thing, traceability, and that too in a transparent way. Another example is Kenya's climate smart maize project. So Kenya is because now this is one of the developed African countries, and they want to export their maize crop to other parts of the world also. So they use satellite data to target the fertilizer need. Now, what is in that satellite data? They would just see, all right, what is the moisture level of the crop, what is the pest which you can see ascending, and that you can see if you have a bird's eye view, and what is the need for fertilizer, what is the need for manuring, what is the need for pesticide. So from the bird's eye view, from the satellite data, continuous data, what is the met report, like meteorological report, what would be the predicted yield. They are not only gaining a margin in exporting maize from Kenya out to the world, but also increasing yield, because now every input being poured into the soil is a measured or is a required amount only, not a random amount that, all right, you get pesticide, immediately pour it into the soil. No, you would do it because everything is being monitored. So they are right now holding a very strong impact finance through impact bonds. They are getting good prices because now world is buying their maize, and they also know that it is sustainably grown. They are not destroying their soil. They are not destroying their water bodies, and this is also feeding the people, and maize, of course, for ethanol people buy. So this is getting very good reputation, and this is happening all. Uh, Obviously, cost is also increasing, and this is all creating an impact bond. Now, Brazil's low carbon agriculture plan, it promotes sustainable intensification, because there was a time in India also where our economy was opening up. We were just starting the green revolution. We wanted to have more money. We wanted to have more buyers. We wanted to have more crop, and we called it agricultural intensification. That means we developed the crops which were early maturing. Instead of 4 months, we got the crops, we researched, we produced crops which were maturing in 2 months. So another 2 months, we still have to grow another set of crops. So intensification means we started using machines. So Brazil's low carbon agriculture plan, although it wishes to promote sustainable intensification, it loans the farmers, it encourages the farmers to work with low emission practices. We wanted to intensify, we did not check the low emission practice. So for that reason, whether we are burning the stubble or whether we are using the tractor running on diesel or even inferior quality fuel, we never thought that, or continuously harvesting, we never thought that this is a high emission practice. But Brazil is going one step strong foot forward, and that is the way to go. And anybody who is making a compliance is given a tax incentive. They are given tax rebate, sometimes they are awarded also by the government. So these are the practices which we should have done. Never too late, we can follow the plan. We have some good examples. So know what CAs should watch out for. Listening to agriculture, and as myself, the director, and Mr. Shah, we were talking about how we can actually have this. A joint venture or maybe collaboration together. So, what will CA look out for in agriculture? They would have a regulatory due diligence in agricultural trade. It's a big part of our GDP, a big part of our economy forms comes from agriculture, whether we are feeding an industry or we are selling as grains or we are selling as processed products. Agriculture is pretty much everywhere. So, the regulatory due diligence, have you done the compliance? Have you followed MRLs? Have you done the essential norms which will help you to export? Cost and compliance of certification should be given by CAs rather than the random international certification agencies, because starting from finance to carbon credits, debit and credit is your language, so it should come from you. Then economic and social audits, the environmental and social audit should be done by the chartered accountants who are very interested in that, because auditing is, again, the concepts of auditing, where people falter, how to have an audit check, not just pinpointing but auditing, and that has to be a regular mechanism. That has to be a regular mechanism in agriculture. And also accounting for carbon offsets and sustainability credits. So these are some new concepts which actually chartered accountants can take up. And when myself, Director Sir, and Mr. Shah were talking, these were some of the things which we can actually develop joint courses, and we can actually train the people more on this. Now, some of the regulatory frameworks around which agriculture works is international regulations, national policies, and regulatory instruments. So international regulations would be like, you have SDGs. So if anything you talk about internationally, everybody you would use these three golden words, S, D, and G. But isn't it a shame that we started with Millennium Development Goal, and then we 2030 we should be completing our SDG, and the recent report says we are not even halfway through it. So what were we doing? We were continuously feeding our profits. We were continuously producing more than what is required. Then national policy. So, our climate resilient national mission on sustainable agriculture is spearheading this mission for producing a crop in an agriculture sustainable way, in a resilient way. And then the schemes like soil health card also promotes a balance, that you would use an input only when you need it. And how would you need it? Because you will test your soil very regularly. And then regulatory instruments, like you have licensing, like you have land use laws to regulate irrigation and conservation. Some of the international norms about regulation, agricultural regulation, is like FAO. We have it. It promotes ecological intensification, and the impact is that it aligns with SDG 2 and 13. Then we have Codex Alimentarius and SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary agreements, wherein we set MRLs and also sanitary and phytosanitary agreements in trade. Then relevance, SDGs relevance to agriculture, like SDG 2, 12, 13, and 15. These directly align with land use, agriculture, and sustainability. Then EU strategy of farm to fork, wherein we know, like, they have kept that whatever is the pesticide use right now, we have a target to reduce it by 50%, and they are actually doing it. It is easier to export to US rather than to EU, because they have made such strict norms, because they want to comply to farm to fork strategy, because they want to strengthen organic conversion, because they want to strengthen the eco labels and traceability. And also the carbon border adjustment mechanism, this is CBAM. This is another important regulation which happens in agriculture. So EU, like the way Donald Trump is putting on trade tariffs, EU has also had a flink of imposing tax on imported goods based on the carbon footprint. Like, if two people are producing the same thing, if your carbon footprint is higher, you will be taxed more, and if somebody else's carbon footprint is lower, he would be taxed less. And how would they know it? They would know it by traceability, the end to end traceability, or the last mile traceability. And then National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture. As I mentioned before, also in India, we are very strongly spearheading this for climate resilient intercropping, rain-fed area, and soil health management. So, overview of Indian agricultural policy states that apart from NMSA, we have fertilizer subsidy and reform. And direct benefit transfer. It is done to the farmers so that if you do not use so many things and if agriculture is subsidized, the money would come to you directly. Then soil health card scheme. It is aimed for balancing the fertilizer and basically soil applications. Then PM Pranam scheme. It encourages the reduction of chemical use, more pushing towards IPM, more pushing towards organic. And then pesticide management bill. Now this is a problem. Pesticide management bill is a bit of a problem because though it is a bill now, the compliance is little difficult because pesticide itself is a huge lobby, and they just do not want that pesticide should be reduced. They would continuously give a subsidy. They would encourage people to buy it. They would have their man on the field, and sometimes they even give it for free, a small portion of it. Ultimately, what happens is farmers buy that and applies it in higher quantities, and then we lose our exports. What could be strategy for sustainable agriculture? First and foremost, policy integration. We have some very good policy, and for which we do not have we have at least very good examples, global examples. So let us pick up from there and let us have a very good policy interaction integration. Then farmer education is very important. Then subsidies for sustainable inputs. If you have subsidy for a very dangerous or red label chemical, obviously farmer will buy that. At the end of the day, it is his pocket money which he is investing. But if you give subsidies on something which is, let us say, biopesticide or neem coated urea, which government has done, or neem coated nano urea, so obviously farmer will buy that. And then at last but not least, it is compliance mechanism. Since I said that CAs do play a very big role in traceability, so let me just walk you through a bit of a traceability component, which forms the basis of exchange of agricultural products, which forms a basis of agri commodity trade, profit, loss, rejection, acceptance, and even carbon credits. So traceability is the ability to trace all processes from procurement of raw materials to production, consumption, disposal, to clarify or to identify what is the origin of the product. Yeah, where are we sourcing it from? It is very simple. When you buy something from Amazon, what message comes, you can trace your consignment, and sometimes it says you may track your consignment. So the difference between traceability and trackability is one step up and one step down, one step up and one step down, whereas when you trace something, you trace it down to the last mile, where exactly we are buying the things. And components of traceability or the traceability system architecture, it has certification and audit agency, it has transformation rules, entry and exit points, it should have traceable assets, and also a policy claim. So if you just see the diagram here, this is a very typical diagram of traceability, wherein we have internal traceability, we have chain traceability, and then we have the external traceability. So internal traceability happens when you are doing it in the at the local level. It could be farm, it could be a factory. Okay, so from where the sourcing has been done, how much of the chemical has been used. So this is internal traceability before you really put your product out in the market. And then there is a chain traceability, because most of the time farmers produce organically, they put it on the conveyor belt or auction belt, it is auctioned, and then when somebody uses it, in transporting from one part of the other, from processing it to making it bleach white flour, they keep on adding chemicals, they keep on adding bleaching powder or any other inputs to increase the shelf life. Okay, now that is something which happened in the chain. It did not happen at the farm gate. I give you one example. Whenever you buy something which is organic, let us say organic atta, you go, just do this today. You go to shop, you pick up that organic atta, whosoever claims they make atta, and then you see a small seal on the right side of it. It says organically produced. Good enough. But production is just one part of the value chain. What we want is organically processed. No organic produce food product will tell you it is organically processed. No, it won't, because they are going to add chemicals for pesticide increase, for a preservative increase, shelf life increase. They are going to add chemicals for color, shine. They are going to add for taste. They are going to add chemicals pretty much at every point in time. But onus to produce organic lies with the farmer. That is why farmer is the one who start doing the goof up at its own level, because he's the one who's always standing at the loss. World Health Organization report alarmingly says in India, the amount of milk which is being circulated, and over and above, we are number one in milk powder, we are number one in skimmed milk, we are number one in curd, we are also number two in cheese, and we are number one in fluid milk. So World Health Organization says you do not have this much of milk being produced. How can you have so many variants, be number one, and still be number one in fluid milk? That means you somewhere your chain is not traced, and people are producing synthetic milk, and that is a health hazard. It is not only carcinogen because milk is being consumed by babies to agile people. It is absolutely unethical. Making milk from shampoos and detergents and things like that, it is absolutely unethical. And then once it is the whole value chain traceability is done, then when you export it, then that is external traceability. So the three forms of traceability, we can also say the types of traceability: activity, internal traceability and external traceability, and direction, that means forward traceability and backward traceability. We know to whom we are giving the product next up in the ladder, and also who we are buying it from. So external traceability, it is going to have what externally we are looking at. It should have a unique product or identification number and a batch or lot number to ascertain that it is traced and it is also organically produced or less carbon produced or whatever is the claim. And internal traceability is when we look inside, when we look towards our own in-house production. And forward traceability is, or client traceability is, when we to whom we are selling, and backward is from whom we are buying. So importance of traceability is it gives you preparedness. You know how much of the product you are able to commit as an organic. You know where you might falter. You know what is your plan B. Then what is the response to that preparedness? Have you trained your people enough? What is the recovery? What if somebody still finds a residue? Do you have plan B? Like recently, US rejected so many of our mangoes. And if you have read that report, the merchant says we would rather throw it in the ocean rather than bringing it back to India. And when it was asked why, they said because the cost would be so much and nobody is going to buy the mango at that price. अब उसका जो price हो जाएगा, nobody will buy mango at that price. So that made me wonder, there are so many countries between India and US. Did we not have a plan B, that in case we are not able to have a deal with them, should we drop these mangoes? Should we sell these mangoes at Europe, Africa, Indian Ocean Islands, then Central Asia, Middle East? We had no land to drop the mangoes. It was India or US or reverse. So that was a very huge, major drawback, and we lost so many mangoes because of that. And what could be the prevention? At least make some agreements. So traceability under European law means ability to track any food, feed, food producing animal or substance that will be used for consumption through the stages of production, processing, and distribution. Why am I speaking this definition? Again, narrating you the example, organically produced. Okay, even if you trace it back, it is only on the farmer's field when they say it is organic. They will never say it is organically processed, whereas EU is so strict that they include production, and they also include processing, and they also include distribution. And if that is not traceable, if that is something which they don't find complying to their norms, they would not buy it. They would not buy it. Now, Industrial Standard Organization or ISO, we all know what ISO is. So traceability and new food traceability standards were published in ISO on 11 July 2007, and every country should mandatorily put the information of one step up and one step down. That means whom they are buying and to whom they are giving, not the entire chain, just one step up and one step down. And just to make sure that one weak link in the entire chain can result into disastrous food, can result into mass casualties. And particularly with food, people are more and more alert. And this is an example of bulk grain supply chain where seed production, farming, handling, processing, and distribution all are traced, because anywhere, if you find a problem, you can actually trace back. Then chain traceability, that was individual traceability, and this is chain traceability, means each value chain. Is it atta value chain? Is it suji value chain? Is it maida value chain, or it is just wheat value chain? What value chain we are discussing now? Now, globally, there is GS1, which is the traceability standard, and it is best described as a meta standard comprised of GS1 standard or the barcodes. So, if you just use the barcode, you need not to produce several papers. If you just use the barcode, you would know from where it was produced, from where it was processed, even if it was audited, what was the audit report, what was the correction happening, and at what stage the fruit or the food is coming to you. It is still under process. Like we in 2017, we revised it for the second time. Second version was released. So the whole idea about GS1 traceability standard is identify, capture, and share. Just three pillars: identify, company location, product, logistics and shipping, assets, and service. Capture through barcodes, through QR codes, through RFIDs, and to share, that means any stakeholder. That is why blockchain comes in very handy, because any stakeholder who's interested in taking this data would just get the information right at the click. Now, next important aspect is Electronic Product Code Information Service, or EPCIS. This is where it is a key element of GS1 traceability, under which the standard is EPCIS 10, or Electronic Product Code Information Services number 10, that deals with food and agriculture. This is a common code for different commodities of exports and import, but 10 number deals with food traceability, food supply chain, and food value chain, logistic units, and other assets. So it also enables end-to-end traceability of products along the chain. I just again repeating the example. When you buy a fruit, or when you buy that organically produced wheat, you might go with the brand advertisement. When you say MPK Sharbati Sona Gehu, you would really believe that. You do not know कि वो पंजाब से गेहूं आ रहा है, हरियाणा से आ रहा है, उत्तर प्रदेश से आ रहा है, या actually MP से आ रहा है. You cannot trace that unless there is a QR code available. So EPCIS actually enables you, when they say that all right, एमपी के शरबती गेहूं है तो एमपी से ही गेहूं आने चाहिए, शरबती वैरायटी ही होनी चाहिए, ऑर्गेनिकली प्रोड्यूस ही होना चाहिए. So everything in the warehouse, in the distributor, in the retailer, everything is being traced. So the key questions are what, when, where, and why. They are all addressed. And then to have a strong regulation, to have a strong control over the quality and also to increase our reputation as a country which stand by its claim. It is very important that we have a digital technology, and that too, particularly in the area of agrochemicals, wherein we can use IoT, sensors, blockchain, data analytics, big data, and then drones. So, potential building blocks would come from the first three. That means IoT, sensors, and blockchain. And from blockchain, obviously, you have too much of data which is being compiled as blocks. So, analysis of that data can be done, and drone can eventually be used to pour in the information how it is functioning or how good it is functioning or what is the data on ground. Then all actors in supply chain must be committed for sustainable crop production, processing, and consumption. All three verticals. Right now, it is only production, sustainable production, sustainable production. We are not even talking about sustainable processing and sustainable consumption. If you see, most of the food which is wasted on any party you go to, your friends going out for dinner, I have never seen a group getting up without so many leftovers on the table. I have never seen that in my life, and I'm sure you must have also not seen it. So, at consumption, also, there should be enough knowledge about sustainability. At processing, also, there should be enough knowledge about sustainability. They should not be using the machines which consume a lot of carbon, which generate a lot of carbon, consume a lot of fuel, waste a lot of raw material. And of course, production, we are aiming to make it more and more sustainable. We know that one point in failure, like any supply chain, is as strong as its weakest link. One weak link and the whole supply chain will come down like a pack of cards, and so will our reputation in the international market. How do we make sure that we are producing quality crops which are not only good quality but also sustainable by the use of genetics, by the use of nanotechnology, and by the use of AI? And also, the future of agriculture in the world of exponential change should be technology driven. It has to be AI. AI's role should be there, IoT's role should be there, traceability should be there, sensors role should be there, and we should focus not on single sustainability but AI driven sustainability, where we are actually talking about demand, supply, materials, methods. We are also talking about traceability. We are also talking about accountability and predictability. So everything can be done by AI. So we should use that. Now, presently, there are certain challenges in sustainable agriculture. First and foremost, when we are talking about technology, there is a risk that we overconsume it, right? During Corona period, we all had that phase where people had to buy three laptops, four laptops for children who had their schools running, for husband and wife who were working in offices. So most of the time, when there used to be one laptop at home, now there are four laptops. Now people are back to office. What do they do with those additional two or three laptops? We are superposing technology on us, and that is a danger. We, like chat gpt, I give you one example. Initially we used to go to library and bring out literature, then we started googling for things, and now, despite of the fact that we all know running chat gpt causes so much of environmental damage, people have started googling on chat gpt for anything they want to know. They would actually open up chat gpt rather than google, and in my experience, chat gpt even hallucinates, google does not. So the trusted system, the reliable system still is Google while ChatGPT is being developed. But we have become so dependent on technology, we don't even remember phone numbers. We don't even remember, all right, did we switch off the AC? We have to look at our apps. So this thing should not happen in agriculture. Over reliance and over dependence, that is going to put more harm than good. That is going to add more carbon than reducing it, and that is going to make agriculture away from being sustainable than making it more sustainable. And as AI, I would rather say not only AI but artificial capable intelligence also is coming up very fast in agriculture, where the traceability, end to end traceability, audits, accountability, not only at the farmer's end but also at PDS, public distribution system, At consumption, even if as a consumer you purchased more than what you can consume and then you had been throwing the vegetables out, it should be traceable. Because had you not purchased it, somebody would have had it, somebody would have eaten it. But then you created a vacuum in the supply. So everything should be traced, particularly the way we consume, the way we produce, and the way we process. Applications of AI in agriculture, precision agriculture, predictive analysis, supply chain optimization, pest and disease management, and automation and robotics. All these verticals are those which can actually make our agriculture more sustainable. It can actually help us to comply to more regulations, and also it will help us to monitor those regulations, to develop those regulations, and also to make everything work very clean, not only for producers, consumers, processors, but also for the environment. So with this, I thank you all, and in case we have any questions.
Yes, a few questions like since India is having a mass chunk of population who is dependent on agriculture. Now, what is the problem that the farmers are not adopting a sustainable agriculture? Whether it's due to lack of financial incentive or due to lack of awareness or anything which is basically discouraging them to encourage sustainable agriculture, although it's very important nowadays to follow that technique of on sustainability.
Sir, farmers do not know what is sustainable for them. The land which was handed over to them was always better than what they are doing to their children. Then, secondly, before they realize that the land is no more sustainable, their requirement is to hold children back and let them do agriculture. Youth does not want to do agriculture at all. So, what they are feeling is as much as we are producing, it is okay. Then, sustainability is not just a single event. You have climate
Yes.
change happening, you have floods happening, drought happening. So he's really not able to figure out, is it only land which is not giving him enough yield, or it is just floods happening, or it is drought happening, or the seeds are extremely hybrid. So he's just not able to figure out what is going wrong. Second thing, when he sees the entire chain, he sees that tomato grower, tomato farmer is a poor one, but Unilever is the richest one, right? The processor and the marketeer is a very rich person. You produce
Yes.
tomatoes for 80 rupee kg, but then you buy tomato ketchup for 800 rupee kg, right? Or at least 400 rupee kg. So that difference, he is just not able to agree. He says, well, where is my profit then? I will use every other way to produce more. Till now, he has not come to that level that, all right, I'm going to produce of inferior quality and then push it off. He says, I want to produce more. He just doesn't know land. He's just not really agreeing that land has a limited capacity. For that, he's feeling, I'm adding so much of fertilizer, I'm adding so much of pesticide, land should give me more yield. So that confusion is actually not helping him. That is why he's not sure whether he is able to produce sustainable. He's able to hold his child back in the village to do agriculture, and at the same time, the difference between the producer economy and the processor economy is so high, it is like multifolds. So he feels cheated. I gave you an example of organically produced wheat, atta organically produced. Organic production is kind of limiting to a farmer because most of his crops get eaten up by the pest attack. So he feels, I take all the risk, I produce organic, my yield is reduced, and you sell organic at a premium price. That is where the problem is happening.
Yes, because as per far the policies are concerned, there are many policies that has been implemented right from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the realization of that these policies needs to be due to lack of awareness, or ultimately the education, or whatever you say. That
Yes.
may be the root cause of all this exercise. So ultimately, awareness to the farmers are very important. to move to the sustainable level of agriculture, because ultimately anything in economics also which is not sustainable, now definitely you can go out of the business,
Yes.
because that is the common thing. Because, yes, it's profit and loss, that is the main part that we studied in economics, because ultimately if you're putting something and you're not getting in return what exactly you have put in, so definitely you're not interested in that part.
Yeah, running a
uh,
vendor continuously at a loss
yes.
will not serve. Yes.
So that is why in GDP also now service sector has gone up, reliance on agriculture that has gone down, although the potentials are very high in case of agriculture also, because lot of research, because in world over, lot many research, lot many expenditure is done on agriculture research, one of the most important areas.
Sir, agriculture is not restricted to food. Agriculture feeds in lot of our industry. Our garment industry, it is cotton and jute. We are using silk. We are using. This is all agriculture. Then our dairy industry, it is all agriculture. Livestock. Our meat industry, it is all agriculture. Piggery,
Sure.
everything. Then our honey industry, nutraceutical industry. This is all agriculture. Then when we speak of medicinal plants, our traditional medicine, it is all agriculture. Wellness sector, if you just see the economy of wellness sector, it is in $1 billion, and agriculture feeds into it. So restricting agriculture to food, and that to food on the table, we would not be doing enough justice, because other aspects, particularly NTFPs, non-timber forest products, they are not even considered as considered for sustainability, or they are not even considered as crop, but then we all benefit from those. So when I said that how chartered accountants can help, because you people see the bigger picture, you people see end to end, you people see where it needs audit and where it has faltered. So that is why your role becomes equally important in making a very robust system.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for, definitely it was a very learning experience for all of us. Although the huge number of participants who have joined across from on pan India basis, and definitely you have also given some areas to think upon for the chartered accountant to work upon. So
Yes.
definitely they are expert in auditing, accounting, and all other part. But definitely their contribution is also very important for development of our country. So thank you once again, and definitely we'll think upon collaborating with IIT, and definitely in future definitely we'll come across with some proposal.
Yes, yes. Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Okay.